Alrighty.
All righty, then welcome everyone to the board's our budget forum for the proposed budget that has been presented this evening. I think we're going to have a presentation, and then we will have time for comments and discussion. So, who am I turning it over to, Mr. Courtney, this evening?
Madam Chair,
Over to me.
making opening remarks.
I have a bit of info there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr.
Okay.
Samuels, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Excuse me for that, Chair Chinya and the Board of Commissioners and the public who are here this evening. I am just going to introduce, I will turn it over to the team in a bit, but I do want to welcome everyone and just briefly frame that tonight's budget presentation for the community. I will apologize for the cello in the background. Probably should have stayed at the office a little later. Oh, sorry.
We're not apologizing for the cello. We're not doing that. Just let it be wonderful, a soundtrack to your comments tonight. That's how we'll do with that.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. But as we get started tonight, I think it's important to frame tonight's initial presentation of the board, of our budget to the board and to the community within the frame of a couple of things. First, this really is a budget that we worked on that would represent continued investments and attention to priorities that have been raised in a number of community feedback sessions from parents and others, but we also recognize that we will need additional feedback. And so tonight is one of the places that we really look to be able to get that feedback. The other piece that I will say about this evening's budget is that in addition to representing those priorities, it's a continuation of the work that we had been doing, but also takes into account the new lift that we had this year with the challenges that the pandemic presented, challenges with meeting the social emotional needs of our students as well as the academic challenges, but frankly, also really setting us in a place where we would build a plan that would reflect some of the additional funding, but one-time funding that we have received to support city schools over the last year with a number of our safety measures and as well as some of our outreach. But one of the pieces that I want to emphasize is that you will see within the Esser Funding, which represents all the money we are getting from the federal government within the last year, you'll see some has initially been spent, but I would also like to draw the public's attention as well as the board's to the latter and frankly largest portion of federal dollars. And this, we are excited, will represent a lot of the one-time funding that, while it might not permit us to permanently expand our costs and expenses because it's one-time funding, does allow us, as we engage this month and next month in community feedback sessions around our recovery planning, which really we are capturing through the words reconnect, reimagine, I always forget the third word, but our 3 R's, really as an opportunity for us to receive additional feedback so that moving forward, those funds are being prioritized along a continuum of prioritization that comes from the board as well as the community and the needs that we are hearing through some of the working groups that have already begun. So again, it is a great opportunity to represent a lot of the work that staff has done, but also really this opportunity to hear from our community and to receive feedback and make adjustments accordingly, as well as to plan for additional funding that's very substantial, but will require even more extensive deliberation. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Courtney, who should introduce himself. And Courtney works with the finance team and has been really one of the key leaders in the budget process this year. And then we'll have additional staff that present. So thank you very much, everyone. And I will turn it over to Courtney.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. All right, good evening, everyone. I am Courtney Desabé. I'm the Special Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer. So I'm going to walk you through our abridged version of the presentation for tonight. It's significantly shorter than the one we did last Tuesday, but we still are maintaining all the main points. I think the interest tonight is to make sure we're getting feedback. So we're hearing from, the community members that have taken the time to join us and any questions that they may have. So we're trying to keep the presentation a little quicker. So I'm going to start off the first couple of slides before we turn it over to Chief Perkins Cohen. So first slide is on community outreach planning. For those who aren't familiar, we received feedback 3 years ago in terms of the timeline for our community engagement. It used to be the practice that we waited till this time of year after we've already sort of developed the initial budget and we're waiting for the final vote to get feedback. But what we have incorporated over the last 3 years is a more robust community engagement process and plan for feedback on not just the school budgets, but the central office budgets as well. And that's taken the form this year of the 4 priority community engagement sessions. So we had sessions targeted at general audiences, our community partners, youth, students, and multilingual families. This year, of course, because of the pandemic, we did it in an online format, something that we had been interested in exploring previously. So viewership was, pretty much through the roof with the amount of people that were able to turn in on our social media platforms, able to watch the streams live and participate live. We did a survey just like we've done for the last couple of years to solicit responses. We provided the data in the surveys provided by the chiefs in different departments in central office, who gave a list of priorities that could realistically be implemented for this fiscal year. And we asked the community to give us feedback on those priorities by selecting their 5 favorites. So on the next slide, we have the top 5 community priorities that were voted on this past year. So we have COVID-19 testing and symptom screening, mental health support, school cleanliness, ventilation, air filtration, and virtual learning platforms for all students. And during the presentation, in the main presentation and this one as well, we highlighted in green, very vividly for you to see the items that tie to these 5 priority items. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Perkins Cohen to go through the alignment with the blueprint strategy for the FY22 budget.
Thanks, Courtney. And Courtney, as Dr. Santelises said, has been, leading this work for a long time. And has been really worked hard in engaging the community around this. So I appreciate his work on that. We're going to go through this quickly so we can get to community comment, but we've tried to kind of really highlight the key areas that we're investing in. And as Dr. Santelises said, these are one-time funds, the additional funds that we're getting, and we're making sure we're thinking about how we use those one-time funds in conjunction with the annual budget process, and particularly how we're meeting this need that we have right now of responding and helping make sure we're restoring, reimagining and reconnecting with students. And so how to do that effectively and making sure we're making long-term investments in students and students' abilities to accelerate learning after the disruption in education that we just experienced. So to do that, we're really trying to hold close to our values and leverage investments we've made in the past and be informed by what research says works as well as what we found works in the past years. And of course, the robust engagement we're going to be doing with the community to hear the community's experience and what their needs are in this moment. So you'll see that as part of that, trying to hold true to what we've been doing and what we've seen works is we're holding true to our blueprint priorities. So in the area of literacy. Just to call out a few, we've done this work with the secondary literacy improvement communities, where we've really created these affinity groups for middle school and high school that work on collecting and analyzing data about student learning to understand and improve teaching and learning outcomes, and they've seen effectiveness there, so we're continuing to invest in that. The Be More Me work has just been really important, impactful work for students. It supports student engagement experiences. There's the Be More Speaker series that I think many of the commissioners and many of the public have participated in. There's the student showcases. There's the Be More Me student fellowship right now, where we've got students who are deeply engaged in advising us on the naming policy and revisions that we need to make to that, to the policy and to the process. And then there's the Be More Me student club, where students work with youth ambassadors to impact change in their schools. In the wholeness work, we continue to support student social and emotional health as well as mental health in the investments we're making. And then we've done a lot of work to provide increased opportunities to students, and so some of the high school work about reimagining CTE and work-based learning experiencing. So making sure work-based learning experiences. So making sure that our programming for CTE is aligned with industry recognized credentials and local industry needs, and that we have increased opportunities for work-based learning opportunities like internships and apprenticeships and work study for our high school students. And then in leadership, we want to keep growing our pipeline and investing in our high-performing staff. And so we also want to make sure we're improving outcomes for students. So opportunity culture is an example, where we're increasing to 20 opportunity culture schools. And we've seen that 95% of staff on current opportunity culture teams have had a positive impact, feel that investment has had a positive impact on their school staff culture. For a principal pipeline, we have a full year residency for 10 promising future principals, and then we have a team of people focused on supporting principals on areas that are really crucial, like talent management, including strategic school recruitment, development, and retention of high quality staff. With regard to Esser, so we, for Esser 1, that was the first grant that we got that is available through September 2022. We've used those funds to do a lot of the device purchases that we needed and the IT upgrades that we needed. So we knew that students needed help with connectivity at home, so we purchased hotspots and internet access, as well as devices for students. And then we also, put in some of the health and safety measures in place, like some of the signs you see around buildings. I was in a building today at Hartford Heights, and they had great spaces for students to walk on as they move through the building to keep that safe social distancing. So those were some of the key investments we made at that time. For Esser 2, we also are continuing to make investments in things like health and safety measures like the COVID testing and contact tracing, as well as we made investments in tutoring for K-8. We bought buses and drivers and aides so we could help space out students. We're going to be buying that so we can space out students to have more space on buses and social distancing on buses. And then we increased our number of custodians to help support, to make sure that our schools are clean in this moment. And then Wi-Fi, those important technology investments for students were part of this as well. For Esser 3, this is the pot of money that Dr. Santelises referred to as the most recent pot that we're going to be doing heavy engagement over the next few months to really get input from the community about how what their experience has been over the last year and how they think we need to invest these resources to achieve our goal of reconnecting, restoring, and reimagining education for our students. So these are the key priority areas that we've identified, and throughout the month of May, there will be opportunities to get input, and as well as in June to get feedback on the plan that we're developing and make sure it reflects what we're hearing from communities. And then some last key initiatives. We, again, throughout this, you'll see a commitment to health and safety to make sure our schools are safe places. We found them to be safe places. The operations team has done just incredible work on improving air quality and putting in the MERV 13 and HEPA air purifiers in our schools. The COVID testing, the results of that have been really strong and shown really low prevalence rates in our schools, about 0.5% in our elementary schools, with I think at this point about 45,000 staff and students tested, and about I think about a percentage point in the high schools. And I don't know the current number of students tested there, but we're really moving along with that program and really showing that our schools are safe places to be. Technology, again, we're just going to keep making sure that we have wireless throughout our buildings, that we've upgraded that, and that our students and staff have access to the devices they need. And then, we're making sure we're still investing in key initiatives like the equity. So, throughout all the work that Dr. Durant has done, she's really, we started with a high-level training of principals and district leadership in equity, in the equity seminar that the introductory to racial equity seminar that she puts together. And now those folks in the school level, we're starting to get to schools now. So those individuals in the schools then are going to be part of school equity action teams in schools, where they'll be working with the school leader to bring the equity priorities forward and provide school-based differentiated support to ensure the alignment of the school's equities priorities with the school's performance plan. And then on reimagining enrollment, choice, and transfer, this reflects our commitment to making sure that we're addressing, and huge kudos to Tina Highcupboard and her team, who's making sure that the ECT process is more equitable. So making the choice and the transfer process more customer friendly for parents, students, and principals, and making sure that we have the right tools to analyze the data so we can explore any equity issues or disparities related to our equity process, like impacts of school mobility on students. And so I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to Courtney to go into some of the numbers.
Thank you, Chief Perkins-Cohen. So this slide is a breakdown of our total revenue allocation. So it includes our general funds, the $1.182 billion, our special grant funds and enterprise funds for a total of $1.393 billion. For comparison, last fiscal year it was 1.388, so not too far off. And to be clear, this is our regular budget. This is independent of the one-time funds, the Esser funds that Chief Perkins-Cohen was just going through on the previous slides. Next slide. This slide kind of highlights side by side the FY21 allocation, FY22 allocations by the independent categories. So the state revenue amounts, city amounts, federal, other, and fund balance contributions. So you see the difference in the totals from 1.172 billion to 1.182, mostly made up of the increase in contribution from city revenue based on our maintenance of effort calculation, as well as the change in fund balance contribution from last year to the coming year. So just as, I know everyone's been paying attention to Kerwin and the veto and legislation. So this is something that we are cognizant of and are thinking through during this fiscal year, as this is supposed to take place, fiscal year 23. So we just want to make sure everyone's aware of the thinking and the work that's going into this and the preparation and how it's going to tie into our R3 initiative. Out here, we have some projections for some of the dollar amounts in the out years. Some of this information is still preliminary, and we're still trying to work to sort through this information as we get it. So mentioned previously the other revenue sources. So we have a breakdown here of the change in fund balance and enterprise fund allocations over the last 3 budgets. So from fiscal year 20 adopted, 21 adopted, and 22. We have an asterisk next to the 21 number because, as I'm sure you're aware, the budget for FY21 was developed before we got into the pandemic situation. So this is what our anticipation was for the revenue level for the enterprise fund. We know, of course, since then that we have not been able to serve meals at the same rate which we had anticipated prior to the pandemic. We've made adjustments and accommodations by assigning staff salaries on the Esser grant, also setting aside assigned fund balance dollars to cover the revenue deficit for food services. The budget for FY22 for food service, of course, is anticipating relatively normal return to food distribution for the upcoming school year. So in terms of the general fund, over the next few slides, we're going to break down a little bit, how it's distributed. We have this direct to school allocations of $803 million, and then we have what's budgeted centrally, not central office, but what's budgeted centrally of 379 million. And later on, we'll kind of break that down a little bit as well. So right here, as I mentioned, we have a breakdown of the items that are budgeted centrally. So we have the $379 million that are budgeted centrally, but a lot of it, as you can see, is allocated for the purposes and benefits of schools. So that 15% slide where slice where we see school supports budgeted centrally, while that's budgeted in the central office, it's done on behalf of schools. Non-distributable fringe, MSA, contribution, debt service, those items are also taken out. And then what's left, the actual 6%, is what's in central office and administration. So that was our last slide. And I believe we're going to open up the floor for questions. Christian.
I'm actually going to turn it back over to Commissioner Chinya to see if there's any board questions first.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to open it up to any board members have specific questions. I'm going to ask if you would, I'm trying to check the screen to see if you've raised your hand, but please identify yourself, board members, as you present your questions. Any? Okay. I see, am I missing anything? I don't see anything from a board member. Okay, I'm sorry. I do, Commissioner Griffin. Commissioner Griffin, can you unmute?
Yes, hi. Sorry, I was trying to toggle two screens at one time. Thank you first for re-presenting this so the board and the public can see it. One of my first questions really has to go to like the breakdown of the budget. I know we went through and said like how much money is going directly to schools, how much is centrally budgeted. I'm just curious about if we could get a further breakdown, and I know this would definitely be helpful for the board and the public to understand how much of this money is directly student facing. So like direct school allocations, how much is going to school counselor funding? I know it's included in the slide, but something that's more of like a streamlined graphic that shows the itemized budget for that direct school funding. It's just kind of like a ask that I have. One of the first questions I have is, will all schools from this budget, I know in the meeting we had on Tuesday, we were talking about the funding that's going toward mental health and wellness, and also whole student specialists. And one of the things that was brought up was increasing the amount of school counselors, psychologists, and wholeness specialists. Does that mean that each school will have one of those? Like, what does that actually break down to look like at the school level when we talk about this budget for the proposed year?
Okay. Not sure if we have anyone from academics on, but we can definitely pull the information on the counts for the allocations for those. I think also you were saying for the breakdown of direct to school allocations, we had a slide previously where we kind of isolated what was charter schools, what was locked positions, unlocked positions, AOPs. I'm assuming you want a little more detail in that. Is there anything else you'd want in the breakdown other than just like specific job titles, like the wholeness or guidance counselors? Is there anything else you'd want us to include in there or pull out specifically?
Anything that really is directly impacting students. So we talk about the wholeness, the support specialists, if we're talking about any additional grants or out of school time funding that's going towards schools, any of the funding that's supporting curriculum development, anything that's going for school culture support. If we could itemize it like that so folks could really understand like what's happening with the budget overall and how it's being broken down at the school level, or how it's being broken down at the district level to go to the schools, because I know the schools get to decide how they break up their funding. That would be, I know, helpful for me. And let me see.
I do see Sarah Warren. I don't know if she wanted to answer a part of the question.
Sure. Good evening. Sarah Warren, Executive Director for Whole Child Services and Support. I can say that in terms of the wholeness specialists, we are not proposing to add any additional ones next year. So that is actually slightly less than what we have had. We're holding steady, but we're also losing one because we've got 2 schools merging and we're losing a person there. So, that's not a growth area. The Strategic Climate Initiative that we began this year is slated to continue. I don't have the exact budget amount for the total in my head right now. I think it's something like 467,000 roughly. That includes the 4 staff that work on it and a little bit of funding to support their work on climate. And then I know at least in my team's budget, there isn't really significant funding for the extracurricular and out of school time activities, but we're anticipating that will come through some of these other funding sources that we're seeing come towards the district. And then typically a lot of those funds go to the schools at the school level, and they get a fair amount of choice in terms of how they spend that.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. I'm trying to think about, like, as one of the main things that the community raises something to address is the mental health portion, like if we are allocating enough to support that work at the school level. That's just one of the things that I want to flag when it comes to this budget.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Commissioner Griffin. I should probably add that on the mental health side of things, so there is approximately 1.5 million in the budget, which is the district share for the expanded school behavioral health program. And that puts mental health clinicians in 131 of our schools. We are hoping, again, with some of this new federal funding that's coming, that we may be able to expand some of that. And then the remainder of the budget on the mental health work comes under the Office of Special Education. And that supports at least 1 social worker in each school, plus psychologists that support the schools and other related service providers. So that is represented here in this budget, but I'm sure that we could pull that out for you if you'd like to see how it sort of plays out in the budget.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I would love to see that. I think my only other question now shifts to the staffing side. And so when we think about our staff, our teachers, our in-school community staff, how is the mental health and culture and supports to transitioning to 5 days a week, possibly teaching in the school system, and or toggling the fact that we may have some teachers that are dedicated to direct in-person instruction and some teachers who are dedicated to doing some hybrid instruction? Where is it allocated in the budget for professional development and or supports for their health and wellness as well? So I'm talking specifically now about staff wholeness supports. Where and how much money is allocated toward that? I really am curious about those pieces.
So I think Jeremy, Chief Grant Skinner is here. He could answer some of that question. He's leading the staff wellness group. And then in terms of the kind of professional learning opportunities or the ways we're supporting staff who are dealing with a lot right now, perhaps Chief Dabrowski could speak a little bit to how the ways we're trying to support staff to be ready to teach in this environment. Jeremy, are you here?
Good evening. Chief Perkins Cohen shared that one of our Reconnect, Restore, Reimagine working groups will be exploring how we can build on things that we have in place to support staff wellness and wholeness. We actually recently shared with the Operations Committee a full update on health and wellness. And as part of that, we highlighted Be Well, our employee wellness program that was new just about exactly 2 years ago, which supported with our joint health committee that is made up of representatives of district administration and our unions, is intended to provide supports across a range of what our staff need. A lot of this is supports that are available through our health insurance programs, through our employee assistance program, and through the supports that we have with the staff on our employee engagement team in the human capital office. So I don't think that there is something existing right now where we have outlined how that all adds up to a dollar amount. But I think those are the foundational things in place to support our staff wellness and wholeness. We have, as part of Be Well, we have 2 wellness educators who are full-time employees, technically employees of Kaiser Permanente and Care First as our 2 health insurance providers. And we have allocated funding through those contracts as well that provide other wellness resources throughout the year of more than $100,000. And we decide each year how to use those funds to support our wellness activities. We also, I would say, as part of last year's budget, we reorganized part of the structure in the Human Capital Office to create this System Learning and Development team that is a 5-member team that is focused on coordinating our professional learning opportunities across the district to make sure we have a good comprehensive picture of which staff are receiving access to which professional learning opportunities and ensuring that they are aligned with the priorities of the district. So those are places that both the professional learning and wellness show up in the existing budget, even before we get into the further engagement through the adult wellness group that we've begun.
Thank you so much for that explanation. That's very helpful context and understanding. I would love to see the dollar amount attached to that, so we just know, like, how much are we taking the time to, one, invest through salaries and benefits and the employee assistant program, but then also what additional, as far as city schools is concerned, are we adding on to that to be proactive in addressing a lot of the issues and the things that folks are going to have to deal with as employees and staff of city schools when they're coming back into the school building or adjusting to different schedules or what have you. I would love to be able to see that breakdown. One last breakdown that I think would be helpful, and it might just also be a cool thing to know from here on out with budgets in general, is like, what does the money look like across the district? Like, when we are sending this money to schools, how is it spread out? For each of the schools, for each of the CLNs, the way that the school district is broken down, like, where are we investing our funds? And if there are any spaces where we are doing really great, and if there are spaces where we really need to pick up the pace and better assist and support our schools. So I would be curious to see that. It's kind of like an asset map across the district.
So I think Chief Dabrowski is here to talk a little bit about the teacher fatigue issue you raised. But before we get to that, I will just say on that last point that you made, the budget book does give some information on a per school basis about the investment. It may not map it the way you're asking for, and so I think it's a good flag to, like, map it by. We have our community conditions index. That would be one way to map it. So I don't think it does that, but it does give you a breakdown of the resources that are in schools and what it, I think a future thing to think about is about what are schools doing with those resources. So, like, what are the mental health supports you're seeing in different schools, and how are we wrapping around students in different schools? So that is something that we will take from here and try to figure out how to get that to you. I don't know if we'll get it by next week, but that is I think in general, especially I think this year is unusual in that we're braiding together all these pieces of money and trying to think about how we're supporting students as we're also preparing for this switch over to Kerwin. And I think in an ideal world, the public would be able to see what we're spending on general funds, what we're spending on Esser funds, what we're spending on private philanthropy. So that's kind of an aspirational goal. We're not there yet, but I do think that's the way it would really be helpful for the communities to be able to understand how we're thinking about using and leveraging all these resources together to meet student needs.
Absolutely.
Sorry, before, I thought Chief Dabrowski was there as well, but I will also say this, Commissioner Griffin, that moving forward, particularly as we plan for the remaining buckets of Esser dollars, the other piece we've talked about very explicitly is what of those dollars are being used across all schools, right? And what of those dollars are being targeted based on need, right? So if we really look at our equity right? If we really look at our equity definition, it is not just about making sure every school has the same thing when we know that there's concentrated need in other school, in particular school communities. So part of what we're going to work on is being able to clearly communicate, not just to the board, but to the community. These are the things all schools get, for example, one social worker, right? But these are the things that, based on the equity mapping we've done, based on concentration of need, based on other determinations, that frankly, not all schools will get, right? Because we've determined that by, very explicit factors, greater need also means greater resources in some respect. And I think it's going to be very important for the board to weigh in on those based on what our equity definition is. And our equity definition as a school district is not always same dollar amount to every single school. It's based on that need. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really what I'm getting at with the map, is because oftentimes seeing that visual and being like, okay, yes, this area, and we folks may have read like about the black butterfly and the white L. We may understand a little bit more about equity and equality. So I'm not talking about equal funding. I'm talking about equitable funding, because I live in a neighborhood where I have one school down the street that has a highly active PTA and a highly active foundation. And I have another school across the street from me that has none of that and needs the extra support from the district to be able to bring their students up to where they should be and receiving the funding that they deserve in order to learn in the school that they deserve to go to. So the map would help illuminate some of that. I think not for me as a board member and for the broader public, visually, to be able to just see how we are investing, how the dollars are being spent at the schools, but also how we support our schools in making that extra jump to where the students are receiving exactly what they need. So I appreciate you bringing up that point, Dr. Santelises. Yes.
And I do see Joan is here if we want to get back to the teacher fatigue issue.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. And I appreciate the question around teacher fatigue, and it's timely in that this is Teacher Appreciation Week. So, a huge shout out to our teachers and all that they are doing and have been doing over the last year plus, right, with these extenuating circumstances. As we think about our reconnect, restore, and reimagine work, we know that professional learning and our investment in that is important. And we also need to be mindful of where our staff is right now at this particular moment as we head into this particular summer. And so one of the things we've been talking about, again, is a multiple sort of phased in approach of where we can offer summer offerings for professional learning that recognize that there may be some staff who need to take some time right at the end of the school year to restore for themselves, and then are ready to jump back in mid-July, right? And there might be others that need time in August, and there might be others that, can you please let me start in September and I'll do some after school things. So I think we're looking at flexibility, a sense of being also responsive to what does a teacher already have in terms of courses they've taken or institutes they've attended. So we're really trying to build that flexibility while also providing a set of core opportunities that all of our staff are given the chance to be, experiencing. So I just want to honor like the hard work that our teachers have been doing and wanting to make sure we're attending to their wellness, and then having flexibility as we look to, again, this reimagine, restore work that we're moving forward in our recovery work.
Thank you all. I'm going to hand over the mic.
Okay. I'm going to call the next two that I see in turn. First, we have Commissioner McFadden, and then following him will be Commissioner Roberts.
Thank you, Commissioner Chinya. I appreciate the presentation. I want to just have a discussion around the hold harmless, the addendum to the blueprint that the state is holding school systems harmless for declining enrollment. But I'm also hearing from members within our community, particularly at Thomas Johnson and a couple of other schools, but Thomas Johnson particularly, how some teachers the surplus process has already begun. So can you all explain to me what that process looks like. So if we're being held harmless as a school system, and we know that we see declining enrollment in some of our school communities, are we also pausing on the school-based level, how we are perhaps shifting things? Courtney, I see you. Or and my question also is related to a particular program, this strings program, and has the potential of no longer existing at Thomas Johnson. And this is one of the last existing strings program that we have in city schools outside of some of our specialty schools. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about the surplus process and the addendum to the blueprint that is holding school systems harmless for declining enrollment. And maybe I'm just a little, I just need clarity in it.
Okay, I can talk to part of that with regards to the funding and the hold harmless and that part of it, and also what we do at the school level. And then I'm going to ask Chief Grant Skinner, who already has his hand up, to talk about the surplus part. So our funding, as you stated, we had a declining enrollment grant, which we received over the last, this would have been the 4th year. This year, actually, we did not receive anything in that declining enrollment grant. The way that it works, it averages the enrollment over a 3-year period and compares it and gives us an amount based on the variance from the norm. This year, because we've had a relatively flat enrollment over the last 2 years, there wasn't a significant dollar amount in there. Our total state funding, however, was still flat, as it has been over the last couple of years. Now, that is independent from the individual school enrollment changes and how they're impacted there. So the dollars that we receive as a district, being in the larger pot, still get distributed on a per pupil basis across our schools, whether charter or traditional schools. So we still have schools who experience enrollment increases and decreases during the course of the year, and because of that can experience dollar fluctuations also because of that. So we still, that part of the process is something that we have been thinking through, specifically with regards to enrollment adjustments in the fall, looking at the change between what's presented in the budget in the spring and how schools are impacted by that in the fall. But true to our ethos of sort of, the dollars following the students where they go, as one school's enrollment increases and we move the allocations towards that school, there are going to be schools where as their enrollment decrease, they lose dollars in allocation as well. So those two things are somewhat independent. The fact that we have a declining enrollment grant and with that we did receive funding allowed the district at large to retain more funding, but it doesn't affect the individual schools at the school level, if that makes any sense. That's based on our internal fair student funding model and the allocation of dollars based on where our pupils move to. And a lot of that is impacted by the fact that we're a choice district and a lot of other factors, that impact city of Baltimore enrollment as well, or movement of families within the city of Baltimore. So there are a number of things that we take into consideration with that. We do have built into our fair student funding model, as we've discussed before, a baseline funding supplement. And this is something that we put into place to help with schools who do experience, declines in enrollment. So as their enrollment changes, we look at what their school should have based on the amount of kids that they have, and we set sort of a threshold, a dollar threshold. And if the school falls below that threshold, we supplement them back up to that dollar threshold. So schools may fall within, a myriad of circumstances, in terms of how they experience it from year to year. You could end up in a school, or a school could be in a situation where their enrollment decreases and they don't really see that dollar impact because the baseline threshold kind of kicks in. And there could be other schools, because of where they sit, if they were already above that threshold, they do experience that as a real loss because their enrollment went down. So it kind of varies from school to school. I do know we're very thoughtful about the enrollment adjustment part of the process and how schools feel and experience that. And it's one of the major projects for this upcoming fiscal year. In addition to everything else, we're kind of figuring out with Kerwin and the new funding model there. We want to be more thoughtful with changes once the school year has already begun, so that once they plan in the spring, like they've gone through the budget collaboratives that they've just gone through in the spring, and they get to the fall and they realize that the enrollment is different from what they planned in the spring, that they're not going through massive upheavals and changes as they might have in the past. So that is something we're working towards, but we're still a district that's kind of founded around the move the dollars where the kids go. And, you know, there are pluses on that equation and there are minuses as well.
I appreciate that. I'm taking some in, and it's Tom. The school is Thomas Jefferson, and I know Chief Grant Skinner is there. I didn't know if he wanted to add, but the school was Thomas Jefferson that I was referring to.
Sure, thanks.
I can pull up the specifics of that school as well to look and see what their funding change, enrollment change, and funding change was, and share that with you later on too.
Thanks, Courtney. Commissioner McFadden, I just wanted to add to what Courtney shared to give a couple of quick scenarios just to explain that the surplus process is sometimes based on a reduction in funding that's available to a school, usually based on their enrollment, which Courtney talked some about. And other times it's just about a strategic decision that is made through the budget process, and which should be informed by you know, community partners. So you know, you could have a school that has 2 English teachers and they have reduced enrollment and therefore reduced funding, and they no longer need 2 English teachers, and now they only need 1 English teacher. And that would mean that if there are 2 English teachers working there right now, one of them would be notified that while they still have a role with the district, there's not the budget for the upcoming year, which means the funding available, but also the choices that are made for the programming to prioritize doesn't support 2 English teacher positions. There are other times that it is just based on the strategic choices. So you could have a school that even increases in their funding and still makes a strategic decision that changes which positions they are funding. They could say, this year we had 2 assistant principals, but next year it makes more sense for us to have only 1 assistant principal, and that allows us to add a science teacher and add some other arts programming. So there are a lot of reasons that a surplus situation can come up, sometimes based on a reduction in funding at the school level and sometimes not. And, you know, Courtney is sharing that he can look up the details, because really in each case, to explain more, we'd have to look at the specific process and the decision-making process that the school went through to create their budget.
I appreciate that. I understand that particular process, and I think that was helpful for the community to hear also. I'm just challenged with if the community was a part of the budget process. I'm now hearing that Thomas Jefferson potentially may be losing a strings program because of all of the adjustments that you all just talked about. Is still disheartening. So I just wanted to make sure that I shared that and I raised that. And Courtney, I would love to look at them individually to kind of see what can happen. But I also know that there are other commissioners with questions, and we really want to hear from the community. So I'm not taking up any more time right now.
Commissioner Roberts, I think you're on.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So I have a couple questions, one of which I would be really interested in seeing where in this particular budget there were any kind of considerations for professional development opportunities for our chief and executive level staff members. Oftentimes we receive updates around the principal pipeline and for teachers and other staff members throughout the district, such as through the Lead from Your Seat initiative. But I would be really interested to see, especially given the last year or so that we've had, where we've seen, you know, our district staffers make waves out of no way, quite honestly. And I don't think I really saw that reflected.
Commissioner Roberts, this is Jeremy Grant Skinner. What I would say is you are right that there is not a specific line item that is dedicated to that for the upcoming year. And at the same time, the same team that I talked about earlier in response to Commissioner Griffin, the System Learning and Development team, has staff members who have capacity and already at times have provided some internal support to staff members, including staff members at the executive level. just to support them in their own leadership. Within individual divisions, there are cases where our executive staff members are also engaging in very personally driven and identified professional learning opportunities from external places that is just funded through the existing budget within a particular division. So I guess I'm saying it happens, and there's not, among the many priorities, we did not allocate a line item that said this is additional money for FY22 for that very specific purpose.
I do want to actually just flag that. I know that we're spending so much and we're being very intentional about identifying a lot of the skill sets that proved to be really helpful during this hybrid learning experience for our students by way of the teachers and the school leaders and even our ILEBs, our network managers, I don't want the executive team and the chiefs to not be included in that. There is support that is needed there also as we are transitioning into this new space. And I didn't see that reflected. But while I have you, Chief Grant Skinner, I'm also really interested in learning, as I think your team is increasing by 8. Are there any considerations for your certification area, your certification office? I know that's a one-person responsibility right now, and that's something that the board hears from, quite honestly, very frequently. Has there been any consideration for adding a staffer to that role?
We did not in the FY22 budget add a position to our recruitment and selection team on which certification staff now sit. We have staff members currently going through an internship with the Maryland State Department of Education that is required for them to gain a different kind of certification, which is a certification to engage in the types of certification analysis and support that previously one staff member was able to do. We are a little bit at the behest of MSDE and offering more often those kinds of opportunities to build up the capacity of team members there. But we will be going from 1 person to 3 people who have that capacity on a recruitment and selection team that more broadly has actually increased over time. So in the FY21 budget and in the FY20 budget, positions were added to that broader team, either through additional budget or reallocation of other positions. So we have been working to build up the capacity there in a couple of ways. Almost all the positions that show up as additions in the Human Capital Office are COVID-related positions that were created to ensure that we can sustain a lot of the additional work that our offices had to take on to support our staff and our schools across the last year without new positions. So the increase that you see in the Human Capital Office is almost all for those new needs.
Thank you so much, Chief. I have one last question, Madam Chair, and that is around the ITD budget. On page 74, I believe it is, for IT system supports and school support, those are 2 line items that are decreasingly for seemingly a second year. And I'm just curious as to, considering the climate of hybrid learning, why there would be decreases for this IT system support and school support.
That was a very good observation, and it's not a decrease directly. What it is actually is part of our balancing the budget for this year. We were able to identify grant sources that could cover some of those existing contracts. So those were moved from general funds onto grants. So that's why you're seeing the decrease in there on the general funds, but they're still in existence and they're still just being covered by grants this year. That was part of us trying to balance central office, with the available general funds.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Courtney.
No problem.
Thank you. I don't see additional board members' hands, and I do want to be certain that we hear from the public. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr.
Chair
Gann. I think
Chinia.
you have the list of folks who signed. Yes.
I did have one question. This is Commissioner Brooks.
I'm sorry. Identify. I think it's Commissioner Brooks, but I can't tell for sure.
Yes. I was saying if I had a,
Okay,
a moment
good.
to ask a question.
Oh, sorry. All right.
Oh no,
Go ahead.
thank you.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to just check in because I know that we talk a lot about our values as it relates to the mental health needs and how our budgets are reflections of our values. And I would love it if someone can tell me sort of based on last year's budget and this year's, what actual percentage of an increase are we allocating to sort of mental health support? Knowing that our current year's ratios were still inefficient and ineffective for meeting the needs of our students, let alone now in a COVID-19 era. So actually, what is the dollar amount contribution that is different from this year, i.e. what is the increase?
And to just align to that, how do we see that throughout the entire district, like Commissioner Griffin was mentioning earlier? So that increase, I would like to just piggyback off of what Dr. Brooks said, but then how do we see that translated throughout the district if this is our priority?
So I think, so I don't know if we can answer, the dollar figure right now. Dr. Brooks is here. I'm hoping she can help give you a flavor of what the increase is for, and then we might have to get back to you with a dollar figure, but you let me know, Deb, what you're holding in your head right now.
So good evening, everyone. Yes, I am Dr. Brooks, the Executive Director of Special Education, and I cannot give you the exact dollar amount right now. We can come back to you with that. But just as Dr. Warren said earlier, we are definitely expanding the supports around mental health for all of our students. So although you heard me say that I am the Executive Director for Special Education, this is not just talking about mental health supports for students that have been identified to receive specially designed instruction. We know that because of this pandemic, there are going to be students that are showing up in ways that they had not shown up previously. And these are both for students that have not been identified to receive specially designed instruction, as well as those that have. And so we have provided in this budget additional mental health supports for our general education students, for our early learners, for those students that are in pre-K and K that may have not had a typical in-person type of experience prior to COVID, as well as for those students that were receiving their specially designed instruction with their typical peers. And because of COVID, they then transition to the virtual learning and are coming back to in-person. So as we are working very closely with our school social workers, our school psychologists, school counselors, our expanded mental health to provide those supports across the district to all of our students, also making sure that as we're working with our student support teams via SST for those students that are general ed and not over-identifying students to receive specially designed instruction, but meeting students where they are, and also working closely with our teachers, working with our teachers to be able to identify those additional supports that students may need as they are returning back in person. And we've even begun some of that work even this year and expanding that work out throughout the summer and next school year with our Reconnect, Redesign, and Reimagine. So again, this is at the forefront of our work as we are looking to see how we can continue to support the whole student, both academically as well as social emotionally. And we will be able to provide you some additional information around the actual dollar amount. But this is something that is in the forefront of our mind as we are supporting students with re-entering and knowing that there have been some traumatic experiences for some of our students, but also just knowing for some of our students, especially again, like I said, our very young learners, as they re-enter in our school buildings, and some enter our school buildings for the first time.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. I guess what this raises is the whole idea with me in terms of total spending. we're talking about putting money for social and emotional needs for the kids and for the practitioners. But where does Esser dollars in budget dollars for the system begin? Because I think we're earmarking a lot of Esser money for programs and ideas and people, social workers and that kind of thing. But Esser money is not permanent, it's finite, and it has a timeline. So in terms of where Esser's money goes versus the regular budget money goes, how do you look at that from the whole idea of what you're talking about in terms of these new programs, these new initiatives, arranged around what happened during COVID? Because COVID created the situation where we said, hey, it's been more expanded, it's more serious, it's more necessary because of COVID. But you're getting money from the government for COVID. You got money in 22, you get more money in 24, you get more money through 26. So how's that timeline look and what's the big picture?
So I can start with the answer to that, Commissioner Reed. I think one of the things that we really need to do is, and that we are doing, is being very strategic about how we use all these different sources of money together. This is we do have this unusual moment in time where we have resources coming from different places, and what's unique about what's happening here is that in many places then school districts are going to face a significant cliff. We will face a cliff too, but ours will be mitigated because as the Esser funds are going away, the Kerwin funds are coming up. So what we need to really be doing is making sure that we understand the intersection of those 2 points and what's allowable to be investments in improving student outcomes that we can do through Esser dollars that then could be potentially picked up from Kerwin. And so there's different allowability requirements about what you can do with different pots of money, but being really strategic to look at this over the long term. I mean, credit to the federal government in terms of the way they've given the money, that it is over a long time, because even though it's one-time funds, this is work that needs to happen over multiple years. So we need to be looking at how we're going to strategically use those resources to meet the immediate needs. And then when there are investments, and to your point, some of the investments we may be making about supporting student mental health, some of those investments may be investments we want to continue. So which are the investments that we make now? A one-time investment like COVID testing, hope to goodness we won't have to make that very long, that will be something we'll be doing in the short term. But longer term investments like mental health supports, some of those are things we might want to continue. So how do we identify those investments that we can use some of the short term money for, but then replace it with some of the Kerwin money as it comes through in the out years?
I think people have to recognize is the fixed versus the variable components. And that's what you're talking about. A lot of this money is variable, but that $1.2 billion is fixed and it's finite. So that's a dilemma we have.
That's right.
Commissioner Reed?
Hi, Chief Dowry. How are you?
Good, Commissioner Reed. I just wanted to piggyback and just say, because I was nodding along to the premise of your question, and it's certainly the case that the big years for the Esser funds are going to be 22, 23, and 24. There's going to be a little bit of a tail in FY25 because of spending requirements, but there's going to be the big 3 years are going to be 22, 23, and 24. And as we tried to outline it reasonably concisely, but there are different types of Esser money, but a hallmark of them is that they're actually pretty flexible. They have a lot of requirements, like reporting requirements, but it is worth pointing out that it's flexible. As a matter of fact, one of the only super clear spending requirements, although there are a lot of reporting requirements, is that 20% of Esser 3, which at $443 million is $88 million, is to focus on recovery. And that's why there was a blue arrow in one of those slides that said from the requirements and guidance of Esser 3, there's a bright arrow to the reconnect, restore, and reimagine work. But just to say it in plain English, just as your question challenges us to do, we absolutely want to spend every single penny of that money, as not just spend it, but spend it as smartly and as comprehensively as we can with the rest of our other spending. Because when we graph it, FY25 is not that far away. I mean, there's a hump in the grant funding, but it's a hump that goes away fairly soon. And how we work with that one-time money, as vital as it is, to make sure we don't set ourselves up for either big cliffs or even mini cliffs. And with Kerwin right behind it, there will be overlap between Kerwin's. There's a relatively small amount in FY22, which is the focus of this budget, in the neighborhood of $22 million. But then FY23 to FY30, it goes from the 200 millions to the 500 million amount, and we absolutely are looking at those two streams as of a piece together, so that we want to use the most flexible money where we can, and have the program money and the year-on-year money for the avoidance of cliffs where we can. So I just, and you, as you have been already, will be getting constant updates on just that exact question.
Thank you. I'm going to ask commissioners, if you have additional questions, if we could hold ours at this time so that we can allow for our public comment, because we have some folks that have come, and really we want to hear from the public for this forum. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over, Mr. Gant, if you will introduce the folks, and we will move into public comment. We'll come back to see if there are any additional things that the board might have.
Thanks, Chair Chinya. Actually, everyone who has signed up is commenting live tonight. So our first sign up is Micaiah Spell, representing Youth as Resources, and I see Micaiah right there. So you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. My name is Micaiah Spell. I am in the 12th grade at Benjamin Franklin High School. I am a member of Youth as Resources Board of Directors. I am presenting tonight on the behalf of Baltimore City Police Free Schools Coalition. The Baltimore City Police Free Schools Coalition is a group of 24 organizations, including Youth as Resources, the Baltimore Algebra Project, the ACLU of Maryland, the Maryland Coalition to Reform School Police Discipline, and the Baltimore Rank, and the FOUL Educators, and 474 individual Baltimore City students, educators, residents, and parents. We are working together to not only demand police-free schools, but to ensure those funds are reallocated for resources and programs to support students. Historically, city police has been overfunded. City schools allocate 6.5 to 7.5 million each year, and actually spends approximately 11 million each year for its initial Baltimore City police force. City schools has identified students' social emotional well-being is one of its top 3 priorities, but its budget for social emotional learning and support is less than half of its policing budget. In December 2020, Youth as Resources administrated a student survey. We received 99 responses and facilitated 5 focus groups with 75 of our peers over Zoom. We asked for feedback around removing school police in an unbiased way. In other words, we did not present any argument or data. About 60% felt that school police should be removed, and another 20% were not sure. Even among the majority of students who felt that police should be in schools, most wanted major changes, such as having school police not wearing uniforms and not get involved in fights or conflicts. Instead of school police, students wanted increased resources for mental health, counselors, security staff, hall monitors, programming, and staff to support positive school climate, services to help students with trauma, stress, and well-being, safe spaces in schools where students and or staff could get help and or decompress, and peer-to-peer programming where students can support one another. Although we recognize and have been involved in many of Baltimore City Schools' police reform and policy changes, we believe that Baltimore City Schools presidents increase the potential for Baltimore City students to become involved in the justice system, which is almost always cause problems. Our our behavior should not be criminalized. We deserve and need increased resources for our mental health, help us resolve conflicts, and help us achieve our goals. Baltimore City School Police Coalition looks forward to working with the Baltimore City the Baltimore City Schools commissioners, the district staff, and others to develop a budget with step down funding for school police and reallocation of those funds, increased support, resources for students. It is what we need, what we want, and what we deserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Micaiah. Next, we have Kelly Quinn, also commenting on the budget, and I see you right there. Also, I just want to acknowledge, I do see in the audience, Alika Bazemore, your hand is up. If you have a question, if you could just put your question in the chat or email, I'll also just put the school board's email address in the chat, but I do want to acknowledge I see your hand. Kelly, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm so delighted to be here this evening. My name is Kelly Quinn. Respectfully, I use the pronoun she, her, hers. I'm a Baltimore City resident, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Choice Program at UMBC. Tonight, I come to join Micaiah and YAR and the other 24 organizations that are a part of the Baltimore Coalition for Police-Free Schools. And I have a slightly different take on what Micaiah just advanced and argued for. Like Commissioner Brooks said, I too really think that budgets are an expression of our values, except in a kind of curious formatting, right, with spreadsheets and graphs and Venn diagrams. And I was so excited to see on page 9 of the current budget, and then again on the slide tonight about wholeness, that a goal of the FY22 budget is to ensure the highest quality education. It is vital that our teaching and learning prioritize the social emotional health of all students. This is what we at Choice really care the most about. For nearly 35 years, Choice has served Maryland youth who are ensnared in the juvenile legal system. In fiscal year 20, we provided engaging programming, resource brokering, and holistic case management for 859 young people who were under the supervision of the Department of Juvenile Services throughout the state of Maryland. 228 of those young people were from Baltimore City. We serve as an alternative to the juvenile legal system, and our primary goal is to reduce the number of Black and Latinx young people in that system. Our model seeks to dismantle racist structures and instead employs strengths-based approaches focused on positive relationships and self-agency. These guiding principles are essential in addressing racial inequalities and at the individual and systemic levels. We've seen directly the positive, safer methods to school discipline and what a positive school community can look like without police. We hold high expectations for our kids and parents, as well as high levels of support. In Baltimore City, we do things like mentoring, systems and barrier mitigation, workforce development, and educational programming. And our work within the city schools has given us an up-close look at how overt and subtle the school-to-prison pipeline can be at the very same time. At its most obvious, students are pulled from classrooms or removed from schools for behaviors, sometimes just childish behaviors, that could be mitigated with better resources or support. This could put them in direct contact with law enforcement, significantly increasing their chances of becoming systems involved. And a less obvious pipeline is equally as dangerous. It involves students who lose sight of their potential, lose sight of their career, their college, and civic pathways. We see this most often when schools' policies and practices do not actually align with a young person's needs. We believe in the promise and practice of community school models and restorative practices. The choice program supports school budgets that prioritize student health and well-being. We support reprioritizing social workers and peacekeepers over uniformed officers with police powers. Thanks so much tonight for your attention and time.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Next, we have Keisha Goodwin. I see you in the participant list. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I hope I'm able to get it within 3 minutes, but according to your notice of the board meeting, it says that we have 5 minutes, but I will begin.
I believe that's for groups.
No, it says as it does to individuals in the first bullet, last line. It's good evening, CEO and commissioners. Hope all is well. This evening, I'm discussing the findings after reviewing the proposed budget for 2021-2022. First, the final 2021 per pupil charter amount is incorrect. The document states that it's $9,112, but it was actually $9,304. Second, students eligible for funding is 73,067. However, when you add traditional schools, 56,103 students, and charter schools, 15,433, that adds up to 71,536 students. So we are missing some students there, and that does not include pre-K. The third finding is that I would like to verify the school's budget in my community, the Frankfurt community, because I am the educational representative on my executive board, and I cannot find the per pupil information for the Title I tier system. The thresholds for Title I, the ESOL per pupil funding, what is the LREA and B per pupil. Also, how much money do schools receive for 0 to 5 hours for SPED, 6 to 10 hours for SPED, 11 to 15 hours for SPED, and 16 plus hours? Please include this information, per pupil information, in the operation budget so that communities can verify their school's budget. Being that the budget is reflective of the district values, I noticed a progressive budget for charter schools, and they actually receive more funding in the final budget as approved, and a regressive and lately stagnant budget for traditional schools. Also, what is the formula for students with disability administration funding? I see that on the projected budgets, but don't know how you arrived at that total. And what is the guidance for money for how many students are needed to be in a self-contained classroom or for a SPED self-contained teacher to do pull-in services for ELA, math, or social studies and science before another SPED teacher is hired? There has been SPED classrooms for ELA up to 16 students in there, and they're teaching these 16 students by themselves, but their homeroom class only has 6 students. Last, I would like to give you some recommendations. I recommend providing traditional schools their per pupil baseline funding for students with disability like you do for charter schools. In addition, small school funding should not come out of traditional schools money, and also charter schools should pay for their own overage of their 2% administration cost. As it stands now, traditional schools is paying for their 2% administration overage. Finally, students need to receive all sources of allotted funds to the district as distributed to their school. For example, an artistic ESOL student that is gifted in math but receives SPED hours for social studies and science and qualifies for Title I, this school will not receive all the allotted sources to support and educate the whole child. This must change for FY 2021 and FY 2022 and beyond. And that is where I conclude. Are there any questions or comments?
Hello, Keisha. Good to see you again. If you have not already, can you please send in your list of questions? I think you usually send them to Christian and then he forwards them along and then we can go through and try and provide responses to them. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin. Next we have, excuse me. Next we have Jill Warzer. Jill, are you available? Yes, you are. Okay.
Hi.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, does everybody hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hello, commissioners and colleagues. I just want to remind ourselves that from November 2017 to April 2018, about 100 stakeholders, city school teachers, central community members, art partners, and funders met in several committees as the Baltimore Arts Education Initiative and developed a fine arts strategic plan for city schools. The work was and continues to be overseen by an advisory council chaired by the Chief of City Schools Office of Teaching and Learning. On May 14, 2018, at a public town hall meeting, Dr. Santalese and school board members confirmed the commitment of the school system to the strategic plan and expansion of fine arts programs system-wide that would meet COMAR regulations and allow arts programs to contribute to students' learning and development to the fullest extent possible. To date, significant progress has been made, notably in the changes to the school's budget guidance, staffing requirements for fine arts, resulting in the hiring of additional fine arts teachers. And you asked us at that time, can you find the teachers? Well, we found the teachers, and the teachers have been trained and integrated into the system. And now, as Commissioner McFadden noted, because of the way that schools are funded, some of those positions may be eliminated, resulting in the lack of continuity of instruction for children. And we still haven't, we set a goal of at least a visual arts and music teacher in every school by school year 22-23, but we haven't achieved that yet. In the meantime, several working groups have continued to develop proposals to meet other priority goals, including expanding instrumental music, dance, theater, media arts, and high school sequential and career path arts courses as outlined in COMAR arts mandates. In December of 2019, the Instrumental Music Working Group proposed to the school board in a budget forum to centrally hire instrumental music teachers to implement band programs for grades 6 through 8 in several schools as a way to kickstart student access to those programs. Discussing the proposal, many board members and Dr. Sandley spoke positively in recognition of the contribution that instrumental music can make, and they felt they couldn't go ahead with the funding, though, uncertainty of bridge funds, Kerwin funding passage. I want to note that under the able leadership of the fine arts administrators Chanel Howard and Jessica Chambers, the dedication and creativity of city schools, arts educators, and partners, arts have been alive and well for city school students in this pandemic years, with lessons emphasizing social emotional wellness, culturally relevant content, and student voice and creativity. And you can see this is actually City Schools Fine Arts Week, and if you go to www.baltimorecityschoolfinearts.org, you can see the student work, see and hear the student work. That the arts in general and instrumental music support social emotional learning, improvement in literacy, math, other subject areas is incontrovertible. The Esser funds coming to city schools provide an unprecedented opportunity to jumpstart the expansion of these programs and on the road to access for city school students equitable with that of other Maryland districts. The blueprint for Maryland's future can be a source for reaching the goal of all students. So the Kerwin funding can help to extend that and help to reach the goals of that strategic plan. I ask you to consider that music and the arts have supported you and your family and our communities during this COVID pandemic crisis and through the ongoing multiple traumas experienced by individuals, families, and communities. Let's make sure that the rising generation we serve can develop their creativity and self-expression to sustain music and the other arts in their lives and the lives of others. Thanks. And I'll note that I've provided this in written form also, so if anybody wants to access that and as a written form, that's possible. And thanks, I want to express my admiration for everybody in the school system and how we've coped and are coping with one of the most unusual education situation I've observed in my essentially 50 years in education. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Robert Miller, speaking of arts education and the budget. Robert, are you available?
Yes, I am. And can you hear me okay?
No, we can't. It's given like a baby voice.
Oh my. Yeah, I don't know what to do.
Robert, can you try logging out and logging back in?
Okay. Should I close off Teams?
Yeah, I would say leave and maybe close out Teams and then restart it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Wait, we'll come back. No worries.
Madam Chair, if I may ask Mr. Gant Christian a question. Christian, the questions that are coming up tonight from our community members, as staff provides responses to them, we'll also receive those responses, correct?
Yes, I need to. So I'm collecting I got a couple written ones, but I can work with finance to capture some of the questions that we're sending. But so far, I just have questions from Ms. Zakia and also Ms. Goodwin.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we track and follow those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Gary Lampkins. Gary, are you available? If you're on the phone, you can hit *6 to unmute. Okay, I see you. Mr. Miller's back. Mr. Miller?
Yes, can you hear me okay this time?
Yes, no baby voice this time.
Okay, fantastic.
No, you sound like the Chipmunks.
No, maybe that could get more attention, you know? Maybe I should try it.
Okay, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Santelises and Board of Commissioners, for this opportunity. I'm Robert Miller, and I'm serving on a Baltimore Arts Education Initiative working group. I'm excited about the possibilities for the use of funds from the American Rescue Plan and the blueprint for Maryland's future to bring Baltimore City's arts education opportunities closer to those that benefit public school students in the rest of the state. As these funds are released, I hope that you will keep in mind the positive effects that arts education can have on students' social emotional learning, as well as the learning loss that students have experienced in the arts due to the pandemic, as well as the lack of opportunities that the city has been able to provide in comparison to the rest of the state. I hope that we will soon see an arts education renaissance in Baltimore City Public Schools. Recently, I have been made aware that as many as 36 Baltimore City schools are surplusing teachers, some of whom are arts educators, because the American Rescue Plan and Blueprint for Maryland's future funds have not been released in time to be included in the school system's present budget. This, of course, causes substantial anxiety as well as logistical challenges to educators, administrators, and communities. I encourage you to find a way to rectify this situation, as significant funds have been committed to the city by our state and federal governments. In fact, elementary and secondary education relief, ESSER funds, can be used to support activities and staff which normally would not be fundable from federal dollars, such as education positions, even if those positions were paid for with local and state funds in the past. ESSER funds are meant to be extremely flexible to fit the needs of the local school district in support of schools reopening and in supporting students through and past the pandemic. They can include other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services in local educational agencies, and continuing to employ existing staff of the local educational agency. In a related matter, as funds become available that could support arts education, please consider funding these efforts centrally. Comparing Baltimore City's arts education opportunities with those in the rest of the state demonstrates that fair student funding does not produce fair results for students with regards to arts education due to a number of factors. Please consider implementing arts education programs with centralized funds, as well as centralized guidance and support. Arts education can have profound effects on students' mental health, as it can provide a sense of belonging, heightened self-esteem, and feelings of accomplishment, while also bringing career and scholarship opportunities, enhancing academic skills, and providing lifelong fulfillment. It can help students recover from the pandemic, for which rescue funds are appropriate, and it can help students have a well-rounded education, for which blueprint funds are appropriate. Your support of arts education can make a tremendous positive difference in the lives of Baltimore City students, and your consideration is very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and glad we got it all straightened out.
I appreciate your help.
Moving back, Gary Lampkins, I do see your phone number. Are you available?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. First thing, let me say this. It was a beautiful thing to listen to people who care about children come together and to move forward in trying to fix something. I know you folks don't get an opportunity for people to say you're doing a great job, but I was just listening. That was a great job. Everybody wasn't agreeing, but you was working. That was beautiful to hear. Now, I would just like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak, but I want to speak about the elephant in the room, not just here in Baltimore, but across the country. Our children's motivation to utilize the school system as a pathway to becoming successful as all of us have. We know there's a lot of factors, but to this disconnect, but in regard to education, I'm gonna refer you back. President Obama stated in some of his past speeches that was not publicized that slavery and systemic racism has caused a generational trauma. And what I did is we have constructed a video, a compilation of his speeches, and I sent it to Ms. Jones. And I would hope that all of you would take an opportunity to look at it, and if you could just pass it on to the next person or put it in the school system so that the children could see it. But everything that you said was around what this president has done in real time, his effort and resources to mitigate the effects. It's not our children's fault. Now, some people may say, "Oh, he about to," but you know what? Based upon what has happened in our past, it's actually not their parents' fault because they're victims. They have not been able to escape the generational plight that both presidents were speaking of. It is good to hear the adjustment in that paradigm, that educational paradigm, to include these children, because it's not their fault. This is not the right form, but I would like to have an opportunity to speak to this board to present a validated concept and a moderating curriculum that has reignited students' motivation to utilize the educational system as intended. I just want the opportunity. I would appreciate it if someone would give me a notification if that could be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will get your written comments from Latrice. Oh, she just sent it to me. And make sure the board gets a copy.
Thank you very much. Hey, keep doing a good job.
Thank you.
Great. No. See, look, that was great. That was great to hear people working for children. That was great. Wow.
Thank you, and I hope we see some more of you. Thank you. Next, our final commenter, Julia Debussilo. Are you on?
I am.
You are. Thank you. Okay, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Board of School Commissioners.
Give me 1 second. Is it 3 minutes or is it 5? What is the time allotment? I just want to make sure we're being fair to everyone.
It is 3. I know the notice said 5, so we're being a little flexible. So if you need some more time, that's fine. But officially, it is 3.
Okay. I shouldn't need any more than that because I'm joined here with so many great colleagues that have already said wonderful things. And thank you, Commissioner McFadden, for elevating this issue. I have a few technical questions on the budget as it relates to Kerwin. But I first wanted to start off by saying, I'm the Director of Arts Every Day. We advocate for equitable access to fine arts in Baltimore City Public Schools. I'm also a public school parent of a 3rd grader here in the city. So I have a vested interest in making sure that the school system is serving all students. And I just want to start off by saying that the equitable access to the arts is an equity issue. The arts are social and emotional learning as well. So 2 of the top priorities of the school district that you've spoken of tonight and within the blueprint may be found within the arts. I'm thrilled to see that they are being prioritized within your work with the American Rescue Plan funds. However, I am very worried about the current budget shortfalls that many schools are posting in the proposed budget because that has a direct implication for fine arts because of spare student funding. The arts are the first thing to get cut when budgets are cut. We have heard from 4 teachers already who have been surplused, have received surplus notices, and that number could grow. The number of schools that I counted on in the budget workbook that are posting an overall loss in budget is 36. Every single one of the 4 teachers that we have heard from to date are within that number of schools that are posting budget losses. And teachers have been told that these decisions are being made because of budget, not because of strategic decisions. So I just want to clarify that point. Secondly, I wanted to highlight the fact that, yes, it's one strings program at one of our elementary middle schools, but this is within the context of less than 12% of students district-wide being able to learn an instrument over the course of their public school career. That's terrible. This is not something that is experienced anywhere else across the state. Every other district has access and gives every student an opportunity to learn an instrument in upper elementary and into middle school to continue into high school and become entrenched and master an instrument. Third, I just want to highlight the short-term issue and ask a question about that $22 million in Kerwin funds. Is that included in the FY22 budget? And if it is not, will it be added to the budget at a later date? And will that be added to school budgets? So that's one question. If it will be added later to the budget workbook, and it will trickle down to school budgets. Is there a way that we can put a freeze on the surplusing of teachers, because we are seeing that fine arts teachers are being surplused at a very alarming rate at this moment in time because of the way the budget is structured right now, and with the way that fair student funding is structuring those losses occurring at the school level, even though the district budget, it sounds like, is mostly flat. So if you could answer those two questions.
Thank you. And Julie, can you also email me your questions or your testimony? That'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I just want to say on the arts questions, and I know this is a board forum, but I do want to put this in as a to-do around the arts piece, that I do think we should come back with an analysis of where we are with our current budget, where we are with the arts plan, as I know was referenced, and then be able to report out publicly. So I will just add that as well. Like, I think we also need a matching of arts plan, current investment, and where we are in terms of the gap. So I would just submit that to the board as well, that we should do a specific art analysis, just given the very public commitment within our budget, and that the board has made over the past number of years because of that plan, to be able to do that. So I'm saying that as much for the team as I am for the board.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Mr. Gant, that ended the public comment, folks who had signed up, I believe you said.
Yes.
Okay. And I thought I'm getting an echo. I'm sorry. I saw Commissioner James's hand is up.
I just wanted to bring attention to the comment in the chat.
Okay, I'm getting confused because I was that your hand, Roberts, or Commissioner James Hassan?
It probably was Commissioner James Hassan. I was just highlighting that there was a comment in the chat.
All righty. You'll have to give me. You have to say a little bit more. I'm sorry. I was reading the chat, but I don't know which comment you're referring to.
Mr. Gant, there's a comment from Ms. Bazemore, and she said she had sent questions in.
So yeah, there's two questions. I see Miss Davis, which has been answered, and then Miss Bazemore. Excuse me. I did receive the questions via email, so I will submit those over to staff. I did receive the questions.
Could you send those to the board also?
Sure.
And I do want to say to Ms. Bazemore, you're raising some of the points that I raised earlier in the meeting. I don't know if you heard me, but a lot of my questions were centered around mental health supports and even after school and out of school time programs and where it shows up in the budget. So we have the same questions, and that information will be shared not only with the board but with the public in the future. I do want to lift up the other point that you raised, which is just around the focus on input from parents and guardians, and also community members in the budgeting process. I'm glad you're here because this is a part of that and is going to continue not just for this year alone, but for the years that are coming after. So I hope that you stay engaged with us and keep raising your questions, even if you got to type them in the chat just like you did, so that we see them, because that's exactly what this time is for.
And also, very quickly, Commissioner Griffin, to that point, if there are any members from our PCAB organization that are present, if you all could put some information in the chat for our parents that are present tonight so that they know how to access you all, attend your meetings, make sure that they're communicating and engaging in that way with that structure that we already have in place to support.
Okay, I'm going to assume that there was no hand up for Commissioner James. I just don't want to
No,
overlook.
her hand has been
'cause
up.
that's what
She's just been waiting respectfully. Her hand is up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone. Thanks for the community for being here and offering your questions. I'd just like to build on the point that Dr. Santelises flagged for staff and for board, if it's possible, to include the health and physical education in that mapping for schools, specifically because we understand health is in this budget over and over again, but the primary job of schooling is education, and there's not a space of health teachers at all. And we've brought this to the attention. I continually will remind us about the state legislation that's required for health education, about the COMAR requirements, and the true needs that we've elevated through our experience with COVID of the value and essentialness of educating our young people to be empowered. Further, the health and physical education standards align with the art standards to be social emotional learning. So again, as the fabric of schooling, to see where that specifically lands in the budget. And then the third piece around that, especially related to Julia and Jill and Robert's comments around the arts, is that these, when within health or within physical education, that the art standards around dance are expected to be met. So if we could, when we think about how that's distributed across the city and how young people are having access to the educational components that lead to the recreational abilities to engage, to be fully arts literate, physically literate, and health literate as well, if we could have that information district-wide to make sure we're not missing pockets of students and make sure that we are emphasizing the academic component of social emotional learning along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Commissioner Griffin, is your hand up again?
Yeah, just one last thing. We heard some comment about around the budget and the amount of money that we are spending on school police and inclusion of school police in schools. I think when we do that map and we talk about student-facing dollars, I would also be curious to see an overlay of where these officers are and what schools, to see where the concentration is. I am curious around the wiggle room with the amount of school police we have in schools and shifting the possible need to shift funding to more proactive things in the budget, like our social emotional learning, our arts programs. So I'm just going to raise that as something that I do think about as a board member personally, and hearing the comment and knowing the conversation that's happening in the community in the moment that we are in society and have been in a long time in the history of policing in itself. I do believe that we have a responsibility to make sure we're addressing that in our budget as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other comments from commissioners.
Yep, Chair Chinya, this is Darrell. I just wanted to just echo this piece, and I am still in a bit of a struggle space with the so what I experience as a sort of a systemic inadequacy for mental health support for our students and our staff, and I think about sort of, as Commissioner Griffin just mentioned, how do we begin to sort of reshape and sort of reconfigure funds, whether it's from the school police or from other areas, to really make sure that when we're scaling up these mental health programs, that one, we recognize that this community, our community, we've all experienced ongoing systemic racism and violence, and that is trauma, and that all lives in schools, and that has been. And so that I feel that if we do not continue to sort of, if we do not sort of adequately address those with, doubling and tripling our mental health support services and funding, we're going to miss this moment. And students, general education students, along with folks who have particular plans, with our general ed students, who live with trauma every single day, we're going to miss the moment. And we're not going to have the appropriate places for them to sort of express themselves and have that sort of be codified as a practice within our schools, within our teachers, and the folks who are working with us. And so for me, sort of that sort of taking restorative practices outside of this idea of discipline and understanding it as a positive cultural intervention instead about how we support and affirm our students. And I think wholeness requires way more money and resources to do that. And I would hope that as we're sort of revisiting sort of whether that's reallocating funds from the school police, one, that we would take a position on that as a board, and then two, whatever we do, we come back with a lot of more money for our students with their mental and emotional support services, knowing that health and wellness and the arts, our physical activity are all core central parts to educating students for wholeness and completeness. And I think I would love for us to continue to sort of dig into that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Brooks. And I would also, just a reminder that, as was stated at the beginning of the presentation, there will be additional levels of some funding that is coming. And so in some of our conversations, we may be looking at the short term or the immediate, but we also we will want to continue this conversation as we look into the additional Esser funds that may be coming, as well as the transition into the Kerwin funds, which may give us even more opportunities for some of these areas of priority that we are identifying. So I know that will be an ongoing conversation. Anyone else? I'm gonna just double check, Commissioner Griffin, because your hand is still up. So I don't want to, okay.
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to give folks the opportunity. I want to, on behalf of the board and staff, I want to thank public who came this evening. I know one of the things that has always been important, I will speak for myself, for me, is that we do allow appropriate and numerous opportunities to get input from our public and our supporters around what our budget should look like and be a part of that process. So I would encourage you to continue. If you have additional comments or questions, to please send those in. I would also encourage folks, if you're connected in any way to a school, either as a parent or a community member, schools are also continuing some of their discussions around the budget process at the school, and you can always contact that facility. We will, as a board, be receiving, as well as the public, the responses to the questions that were brought this evening. Please know that board members will be studying this information and reviewing this, and we'll probably continue to ask some of those same questions before we make a final vote on the proposed budget. With that, if there are no other comments, I believe our vote for the budget is the next.
It's Madam Chair.
Meeting.
I mean,
yes.
the 11th. Sorry, the 11th.
May 11th.
Yes, May the 11th, which is not very far away. So please be certain to send that information, because we have a lot to consider in that time. Commissioner Reed?
This is more as a citizen than a board member. I guess one thing, when you look at budgets, you have to realize that money is finite. we can be aspirational as all we want, but if you don't have the money, you can't do things. So therefore, you have to select the things you can do. The other is, I think the gentleman said it earlier. It's about the kids. So when we look at the budget, we look at values. What's important for the kids, and can we deliver what the kids need? 2022, ad infinitum. So I'm speaking as a citizen, not as a commissioner, but as the guy said, and all of us agree, whatever we do in spending, in acting, it's about the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, if there are no other comments, then I will say thank you again to everyone, and this forum will be closed at this time. I want to hope that you all have a very good evening, and again, thank you for joining us. Keep the input and comments and questions coming. I'm seeing a hand, but I really can't tell who that is. Commissioner, again, can you? Okay, maybe it was a waving goodbye, and I'm thinking it's a hand. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Our forum will be dismissed for this evening. Thank you very much.